She waited until the palace halls were empty, until the lights dimmed, and until the last guard turned his back to the wall. That's when Queen Camilla slipped into the sealed archive chamber, the one untouched since Elizabeth's funeral, the one hiding the crown's oldest secrets. She thought no one had seen her, but one royal guard had. And what he did next didn't just stop a theft.
Adam!
It called into question her right to the crown itself. Windsor Castle had its own rhythm after dark. The grand corridors, usually bursting with ceremony and important figures, sank into a solemn stillness once the final echoes of state business faded. The daytime world of polished shoes clicking across marble, of hushed voices delivering urgent reports of velvet robes and ancient rituals, all dissolved with the last fading light. What remained was a silence that pressed against the walls, as if the very stones were breathing out. Centuries of secrets. The staff who remained worked quietly, moving like whispers across polished floors. Their tasks were small, but necessary: extinguishing lamps, locking doors, securing files that must never be misplaced. They moved with the kind of careful routine that only long habit could teach. Yet, in certain wings of the castle, the ones farthest from the royal apartments, in the depths where the archives were kept, silence reigned differently. It was not the soft quiet of bedtime, but something heavier, something layered with memory. Those corridors carried the weight of history itself, and it was as if the stones refused to let go of what they had seen. Sergeant Ree Mallory understood that silence better than most. At 39, with short-cropped hair gone silver at the edges and a face carved by years of service, he wore the calm of a man who had lived through darker places than Windsor Castle's shadowed halls. Before his posting here, he had known war zones were the wrong kind of silence: an empty street. A still field meant danger. It survived long nights listening to silence thickened with dread. That was why he noticed the difference. Could distinguish between quiet that offered peace and quiet that promised trouble. And on nights when the archival halls sank into their own peculiar hush, Ree felt something stir at the edges of his instincts. His post outside the East Archival corridor wasn't glamorous. To most of the guards, it was dull work, the kind that demanded attention without ever rewarding it. No visiting dignitary would pass through these doors. No procession of royals would sweep across these stone floors. But Ree held a different view. He knew that the power of a nation wasn't just on display in thrones or jewels. It lived, too, in the quiet places, in the documents, letters, and relics sealed away from public sight. These archives contained centuries of knowledge, treaties that had shaped empires, records of wars, letters that toppled ministers, maps that redrew borders. In those quiet rooms, history was not a story, it was evidence. And evidence, Ree knew, was power. Tonight, as the clock neared midnight, the corridor stretched before him like a darkened river. The tall windows reflected the faint shimmer of moonlight fractured across the old glass. The air carried a faint chill that no radiator seemed able to push back, a reminder that the castle was older than the systems built to heat it. Ree stood, steady hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning a hall that had once carried kings and queens to chambers long forgotten. To keep himself sharp, he often listened. Not for footsteps, that was too obvious, but for the subtler things, the groan of beams in the ceiling, the draft that whispered through gaps in ancient stonework, the far-off click of a door latch as staff made their final rounds. Each sound had its place. Each sound was expected. When something fell out of rhythm, Ree noticed. He thought often of the archives behind the heavy oak doors. Few guards were permitted inside. Access required layers of clearance, and even then movement was tracked. What little Ree knew came from overheard remarks and the casual gossip of staff. Some said the rooms held manuscripts from the Norman conquest. Others swore they contained letters never delivered, sealed orders never opened, or even sketches of inventions too dangerous to reveal. One archivist, after a second glass of wine, had once whispered about boxes labeled only with initials, stored deep where no one asked questions. Whether any of that was true, Ree did not know. But he felt the presence of those hidden things every time he stood watch. It was as if the secrets behind the doors breathed faintly, adding their weight. To the silence, on this particular night, the hush seemed thicker than usual. Ree leaned slightly, listening. Nothing stirred, yet his instincts prickled in a way he had not felt in years. He remembered the stillness of Afghan valleys before an ambush, the sudden absence of night insects in deserts where enemies waited. His body tensed. The corridor, he realized, was too quiet. Even the usual hum of the heating system seemed absent. He shifted his stance, moving a step closer to the oak doors. His boots echoed faintly, the sound sharp against the silence. He let his hand brush the cool brass of the handle not to open, but to ground himself. The door vibrated ever so slightly, as if something inside had disturbed the air. Of course, it could have been nothing. Castles had their quirks. Drafts slipped through ancient stone. Rodents scurried behind paneling. Timbers creaked as they settled. He told himself all this, but the instinct inside him did not relax. Years of training had carved into him the rule, never dismiss the quiet when it feels wrong. He straightened again, eyes sweeping the hall. Ooh. Far down the corridor, a faint glow flickered brief, then gone. Candlelight, impossible. Electric lamps lit the halls now, perhaps a reflection from outside. Yet the moon was veiled by cloud, and the window showed nothing but shadow. Ree's jaw tightened. He checked his watch. Midnight had passed. Officially no one should be in the archival halls. At this hour, he reached for the small radio clipped to his belt, hesitated, then lowered his hand. To call in a disturbance without proof could mean embarrassment, reprimand, or worse, loss of post. But to ignore the feeling, that was unthinkable. He took a steady breath, ears straining. There it was, again a flicker, faint but undeniable, like light shifting against stone. He moved silently down the corridor, every sense awake. His boots barely kissed the ground. Stillness thickened, pressing around him, till it felt as if the castle itself was holding its breath. As he approached the bend in the corridor, the glow appeared once more, slender, golden, escaping from the crack beneath a smaller door that led into one of the side archive chambers. Ree stopped. That door was meant to be locked. Only archivists carried the keys, and none would be working past midnight. The silence roared in his ears. He could almost hear his heartbeat against the stone. Something or someone was inside. His uniform fit like armor, the red tunic pressed so sharp that every crease seemed drawn with a blade, like metals aligned with military precision, boots polished until they could mirror the light spilling from chandeliers above. For Sergeant Ree Mallory, appearance was not vanity, it was discipline, the visible reflection of an inner order. Afghanistan had carved that into him. In Helmand, he had learned the truth of discipline, that it wasn't about looking sharp for parades, but about survival when chaos struck. In the desert, a loose strap, an untied bootlace, or a misplaced magazine could cost a life. But Windsor had taught him something deeper. Here, amid centuries of history, discipline became guardianship not of comrades in arms, but of a lineage, a nation, a continuity older than memory. To stand guard here was to defend more than walls. It was to safeguard the very symbols of endurance. 3 hours into his midnight watch, he felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shift in the air. The almost imperceptible ripple that triggered instincts honed in war zones. The kind of instinct that had saved his life more than once in Helmand's dust storms, where silence sometimes meant the enemy was already watching. Ree stiffened. His eyes swept the hall. At first everything appeared as it should. Polished cases, gleamed with relics sealed behind glass. Portraits of monarchs gazed down with their immortal stare. The great corridor stretched long and empty, but then, in the reflection of one glass display, he saw it movement. It was subtle, almost ghostly, in a section that should have been locked long ago. Not the uncertain shuffle of a cleaner, not the hurried panic of a thief. No, this was purposeful. Whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. Ree didn't. Turn his head directly. Instead, he let his eyes drift just enough to catch the outline of a slim silhouette. The stride was confident, elegant, deliberate. Expensive heels tapped against marble, each step sharp and unmistakable in the hush of midnight. The sound carried differently at night. It sliced, it echoed, lingered, and Ree didn't need to see her face to know. Years of ceremonial duty had trained him to recognize the royals, not just by their faces, but by their presence, the tilt of their chins, the set of their shoulders, the rhythm of their walk. Each one was distinct. It's like a signature written not in ink, but in motion. Queen Camilla, moving alone in corridors she should never have had access to. A cold weight settled in his chest. His grip on the ceremonial rifle did not falter, but the old combat instinct whispered to him, "This is not right." There were protocols, of course. Always protocols. If a royal was out of place, a guard logged it, reported it, waited for senior supervision. Everything documented, everything explained, everything contained within the strict order of command. But those procedures assumed normal circumstances. This was not normal. Camilla moved like a woman on a mission, not like someone who had lost her way in the sprawling castle. And if she was heading where Reese suspected, the restricted chambers of the East archival wing, then something was happening far outside. It's the bounds of protocol. He made his decision in a heartbeat. It was the same kind of decision he had once made in Afghanistan, when hesitation meant a bullet. Instinct spoke louder than rules, and instinct had never lied to him. Reese slipped quietly from his post, letting the silence swallow him. Months of guarding this wing had taught him its secrets, which floorboards betrayed a creak, which stones were uneven, where the cameras left blind spots. This was his ground, and he knew how to move unseen. He followed at a distance, his steps softer than breath. Camilla's heels clicked in perfect rhythm, carrying her deeper into the wing. She never glanced back, never hesitated. That alone unsettled him. Royals did not walk unescorted in forgotten corridors.
Out here?
Not at this hour, certainly not toward the archives. The East Wing was older than most of the castle, stones darkened by centuries, its air colder as though the chill of history lingered there permanently. The deeper one walked, the more the silence thickened, until it felt less like absence of sound and more like the presence of something unspeaking. Ree's breath slowed, controlled, his body remembering patrols through ruined compounds. His senses reached outward, the faint draft that slid beneath the doors, the pulse in his ears, the echo of those heels. Then Camilla stopped. She stood before a door, oak, iron-bound, locked with mechanisms only a handful of archivists had keys to. Ree knew it well. Beyond that door lay documents most would never see. Papers that shaped wars, secrets sealed for centuries, files too dangerous or too embarrassing to ever leave those shelves. He had heard rumors whispered over late-night tea by archivists, coded letters from the Cold War, treaties never ratified, but never destroyed, even sealed testimony from royals long dead. Camilla reached into her coat and produced a small key. Not a ceremonial one, not the oversized symbols handed out at public ceremonies. A practical one, cold metal worn at the edges. The lock gave way with a soft click. Ree froze. His grip tightened on his rifle. How did she? That door should not have been hers to open. Camilla slipped inside, the heavy wood sighing shut behind her. For a moment, Ree stood in the shadows, torn. Protocol screamed at him. Call it in. Stay at your post. Do not engage. But instinct burned. Hotter. If you call it in, it will vanish in paperwork. If you wait, you may never know what she seeks. The decision weighed on him like a mountain. He thought of Helmond, of nights where the wrong choice had cost men their lives. Thought of Windsor, of the centuries that breathed through its stones. And he thought of that door, now closed, hiding a queen in a place she had no right to be. He stepped forward, silently, carefully, every movement a calculation. When he reached the door, he pressed his ear against the wood. Faint sounds reached him, papers shifting, drawers opening, the delicate scrape of metal. No heels now, no rhythm. Only the quiet, efficient movements of someone searching for something precise. Ree's mind raced. What could she be looking for? Why here? Why now? Why alone? The silence pressed harder. Ree placed his hand on the door, feeling the vibrations through centuries of oak. He knew the weight of what he was about to do. To open it was to step beyond duty and into something dangerous. But to walk away was worse. He turned the handle, following the queen. Consort without orders was the sort of move that ended careers. Ree knew it. Every guard knew it. A breach of protocol like this could erase decades of service, turn a decorated soldier into a disgraced footnote in official records. Yet letting her into a sealed archive unsupervised carried its own kind of danger, one that could end not just his career, but legacies. He moved like vapor through the halls, every step calculated, every breath measured. Shadows stretched long across the darkened corridor, and portraits of long-dead monarchs seemed to watch him pass with silent judgment. Faces frozen in oil, their eyes followed him like specters. Kings who had lost crowns, queens who had lost heads, rulers who had faced their own impossible battles between loyalty and duty. In the silence, Ree could almost hear them asking, "Whose side are you on?" The air grew colder as they approached, the restricted wing, as though the stones themselves resented the intrusion. Windsor had moods. At night, when the warmth of the day had bled from the walls, its chill revealed itself not just physical, but spiritual. Every guard who had worked the midnight watch felt it. Some joked the castle was haunted. Ree didn't joke. He had lived. In places where ghosts were real enough, even if they wore the faces of memory. Camilla's voice reached him first, carried by stone walls that amplified even whispers. It struck him like a sudden crack of light in darkness. Her tone was sharp, edged with thinning patience. "Keep your eyes ahead. We're not wandering. We're retrieving." Ree halted, pressing himself into shadow and aid. She wasn't alone. The ade's reply was soft, too soft to carry in full. But the hesitation in her voice was unmistakable. It was the sound of uncertainty, of fear. A quiver that came not from lack of loyalty, but from the awareness of danger of doing something that could never be explained in daylight. "There's no harm in it," Camilla snapped, louder now. "Elizabeth wanted it this way," she promised. "Me these pieces personally?" Ree's chest tightened. The words cut through him like a blade. Promises. Personal promises. Verbal agreements whispered in drawing rooms and corridors of power. He had seen enough of history to know what such promises became. Excuses, justifications, loopholes used to strip collections bare, priceless artifacts spirited away, leaving empty cases and bitter disputes that outlasted the monarchs themselves. Promises could fracture dynasties. Promises could erase history. Camilla's heels clicked once more, leading them deeper. They stopped before a tapestry embroidered with the Windsor crest, a rampant lion, crown, and threads so rich they glimmered even in shadow. If you knew what lay behind it, Ree did. A hidden alcove. A door sealed since Elizabeth's death. The Queen's private archive, asterisk, asterisk, this was no ordinary chamber, was the kind of place whispered about in staff corridors, never spoken of formally. Inside were items too valuable to display, too sensitive to catalog, too personal to entrust even to the official record. And now, Camilla was unlocking it. Repositioned himself close enough to hear, close enough to feel the weight of history, pressing against his ribs but far enough to remain unseen. His breath fogged faintly in the cold. She didn't trust them, Camilla said, her voice carrying clearly now. It's firm and defiant. That's why she kept things separate. Elizabeth told me herself some items were too personal to leave in their hands. Her aide whispered something urgent, fearful. The tone was pleading now, restrained to hear, but the words blurred into the stone. Still, he didn't need clarity. He knew fear when he heard it. Inside, hinges groaned softly. A lock turned, the tapestry swayed faintly as the secret door gave way. The smell of cedar and dust, centuries old, drifted into the hall. Ree's pulse quickened. Camilla stepped inside. Her heels silenced by thick carpets preserved from moth and time. The aide followed reluctantly, each movement heavy with dread. The door side shut behind them. Ree pressed himself closer, his heartbeat steady but hard. Every soldier knew the line between courage and recklessness. He could feel himself standing on it now. This was no longer just a queen seeking privacy. This was something else, and Ree had a choice. He could step back, return to his post, pretend none of this had happened. By dawn, it would be as though the night had passed without incident. He would keep his career, his medals, his reputation, or he could do what his instincts demanded. Push further, risk everything, and uncover what exactly the queen consort was retrieving from the dead queen's secret vault. Rhys closed his eyes, hearing echoes of gunfire in deserts half a world away, the memory of comrades who had fallen because hesitation had cost them seconds. He had sworn never again. Duty was clear, but duty, he realized, wasn't always two orders. Sometimes it was two truth. He reached for the tapestry, she promised. Camilla replied coldly. That's all that matters. The words hung in the corridor like frost. Rhys watched. Through the warped reflection of a brass wall fixture, his pulse steady but heavy, as Camilla reached into her handbag. Her fingers emerged with something gleaming, something that didn't belong in any ordinary handbag. A key, not a modern card, not a scanner, not even the brass copies archivists used for restricted chambers. This was different, ornate, old, forged. In an era when locksmithing was an art, when locks themselves were designed to inspire, its long neck caught the faint light, and Rhys felt a chill. He had seen one like it only once before during a briefing at Balmoral, when legacy access protocols were discussed. 3 keys, and only 3. One buried with Elizabeth, sealed forever. One locked away in the royal vault, only released with parliamentary authorization. And one that should never, under any circumstance, be used without documentation. Witnesses and ceremony. The sound of tumblers turning echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Metal grinding against metal that had not moved since the day of mourning ended. To Rhys, it sounded like betrayal itself, sharp and final. The lock gave. The oak and iron door, centuries old, swung open with a groan. Warm preservation light spilled out, casting golden beams across the cold stone corridor. Camilla stepped inside with the ease of entitlement. The confidence of someone who believed she had every right, except she didn't. Rhys moved closer, his boots silent on the worn carpet runner, his body angled to the frame, every motion practiced, cautious, predator-like. His jaw tightened when he caught his first glimpse inside the chamber sealed for 2 years. It wasn't grief. It wasn't reverence. It was looting. 3 velvet-lined drawers were already pulled open, their hinges sighing with neglect. Inside, artifacts gleamed beneath preservation lights, brooches glittering like frozen constellations, pendants that carried dynasties in their design, bracelets heavy with history. Camilla moved among them not like a mourner but like a collector. Her gloved hands hovered with practiced care, choosing pieces the way one might in a private boutique. Her aide stood nearby, pale and sweating, clutching a leather satchel already half full. Gold threads glinted in the lamplight where brooches lay pressed against pearls. The weight sagged. The satchel, visibly it, was more than trinkets. These were crown heirlooms, undocumented, unsupervised. Start with the brooches, Camilla instructed. Her tone, casual, transactional. The coronet goes in the side pouch. Careful with the Stuart pendant, it's delicate. Rhys' stomach turned. The Stuart pendant. He had heard of it in whispers mentioned by preservation officials with awe. A relic of a lost lineage crafted by jewelers whose names no one remembered, and whose work had endured through revolutions and wars. It wasn't just jewelry. It was history incarnate. And here it was, treated like property to be tucked away. Rhys shifted forward, his eyes narrowing through the narrow gap between door and frame. He saw Camilla lift a sapphire bracelet, holding it to the light, tilting it the way buyers examine gems at an auction. Her expression was clinical, appraising. The aide wiped sweat from her brow, fumbling to pack the satchel without damaging. The velvet lining? Ma'am, are we sure about this? The aide whispered, her voice cracking. Some of these aren't even catalogued. What if someone checks? We're not documenting anything, Camilla replied flatly, without looking up. This is a family matter, when Charles asks. I'll say I found them in my quarters. Elizabeth must have moved them before she died. The ease of the lie made Rhee's fists clench. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't grief. This was calculated. Appropriation shielded by the excuse of inheritance. He had seen this before in different guises and villages, where warlords stripped ancient mosques for their tiles. In mansions where generals claimed artifacts for safekeeping. Always the same justification. Always the same theft. She wanted them passed down, Camilla added, slipping the bracelet into the satchel. She said not everything belongs in glass. Another unwitnessed promise. Another excuse. Rhee's hand drifted to his cuff. Hidden there was the silent alarm button, an old safeguard, known only to the inner circle of guards. One press, and the east wing would be flooded with security within minutes. He hesitated, thumb resting on the trigger. One press and everything would be exposed. The queen consort caught red-handed, scandal that would split the monarchy. One press, and Rhee would lose everything. His career, his reputation, maybe even his freedom. Guards were not meant to spy. Guards were meant to protect. He drew a slow breath. His eyes swept the chamber again. No archivists, no cameras, no records. The vault stood open, its lock bypassed without a trace. If he said nothing, no one would ever know. Still, he couldn't unsee what he had seen. He remembered Helmond. The night his squad had been pinned down because a superior officer ignored intelligence. Men died because silence was easier than confrontation. Rhee had sworn never again, never silence when it mattered. His thumb pressed harder against the alarm switch, but then a sound, not from the chamber, from deeper within the archives. A creak. Faint, but distinct, like a door opening where no door should be. Rhee's head snapped toward the shadowed corridor beyond. His instincts sharpened, cutting through hesitation. They weren't alone. The chamber's silence fractured under the weight of authority. Inspector Harav's measured steps carried her straight to the open drawers, her sharp eyes scanning the artifacts like a surgeon assessing wounds. The blinking amber lights painted her face in flashes of warning. Who accessed this vault? She asked, her voice clipped. Camilla straightened every inch. The queen consort now. I did, she said coolly, the key entrusted to me by the late queen herself. Trenton, the archivist, nearly dropped his tablet. Ma'am, that's impossible. The key record only to exist on active log. One is in the vault. The other is buried with Elizabeth. Yes, Camilla interrupted, her tone smooth but sharp. Unless, of course, she passed one to me privately. Which she did. Rhee's jaw tensed. Lies again. Always cloaked in the language of inheritance, Inspector Harav didn't react outwardly. Instead, she leaned closer to the satchel, bulging with jewels and relics. And you intended to catalog these removals when Your Majesty? Camilla's lips curled. Cataloging is unnecessary. These are family heirlooms. The late Queen's. Wishes were personal, not bureaucratic. Harav flicked her eyes toward Rhee. Sergeant, was anyone else present when the vault was opened? Yes, ma'am, Rhee replied evenly. The aide. All eyes shifted to the young woman clutching the satchel. Her knuckles were white, her breath shallow. She stammered, I was only following instructions. Camilla's glare cut into her like a blade. The message was clear. Silence. Harav stepped forward, her authority unshaken by royal titles. Your Majesty, sealed heritage cannot be unsealed without recorded consent. Even a monarch's verbal wishes don't override preservation law. You know this. Camilla's eyes narrowed to slits. And you know better than to lecture me in my own palace. Trenton's voice cracked as he read from his tablet. Vault Chamber 14 contains unlisted items of cultural and political significance. If any are missing, the collection's integrity is compromised. Protocol dictates immediate lockdown. Ah! Words immediate lockdown echoed like a bell toll. Camilla turned her full attention on Rhee then, as though he were the fulcrum on which this entire confrontation balanced. You did this, she hissed. You called them. You undermined me. Rhee stood unflinching. I did my duty. The chamber felt colder. The air seemed to thicken with centuries of judgment from the stone walls themselves. Harav gave a single nod. Two plainclothes officers stepped in, hands resting near their holsters not drawn. But a reminder. By protocol, Harav announced, the vault seals again. No items leave until full audit is completed. No exceptions. Camilla's laugh was bitter, hollow. Do you grasp the enormity of what you're suggesting? Detaining the queen consort's actions? Blocking her word? Not blocking, Harav said. Documenting. The aide set the satchel down as though it burned. Trenton rushed forward, his trembling hands already snapping photographs, logging artifacts, recording the exact positions they had been in before Camilla's intrusion. Camilla's fury deepened. You're making a spectacle of nothing. When Charles hears of this, when the king is briefed, Harav interrupted firmly. He'll see the full report, not a fragment. That's how the chain works. He caught the subtle glance. Harav gave him acknowledgement. Not praise, but recognition that his instincts had prevented something irreversible. Still, he felt no triumph. Only the weight of what he'd seen, the ease with which someone at the very top had tried to strip history bare under the cover of night. Camilla smoothed her gloves, regaining some composure. This is an insult to me. To the throne. You'll regret humiliating me this way. He spoke before Harav could. His voice was calm, but every syllable carried iron, respectfully. Your Majesty, history has seen greater than us humbled for less. My oath is not to you, it's to the crown. The law and the legacy we guard. For the first time, Camilla faltered, just for a heartbeat. Her eyes darted to the artifacts, the satchel, the broken seals. Then she drew herself tall, her voice frosted itself. You think tonight decides anything? History is written by those who endure, Sergeant. Remember that? Inspector Harav motioned to the officers. Escort Her Majesty back to her quarters, discreetly. No public disruption. The audit begins now. The aides and archivists scrambled to action, sealing drawers, photographing seals, checking lists against the ledger. The vault door began. Its slow, grinding closure. Rhys stood his ground, watching until the last sliver of light vanished behind reinforced steel. Only then did he let his shoulders ease, just barely. Harav lingered, her voice low. You understand what comes next? Sergeant statements, investigations, political storms. She won't forget this. I don't need her to forget, Rhys answered quietly. I just need history to remain intact. For a moment, Harav's hard facade softened. You've done more tonight than most would dare. But understand truth has enemies, especially when it wears a crown. Rhys gave a curt nod. I've met enemies before. The chamber emptied, leaving him alone with silence again. Not the silence of danger, nor of conspiracy, but the silence of a place that had nearly been broken. He looked once at the sealed vault, imagining the centuries locked within, and whispered under his breath, not tonight. The silence in the corridor was deafening. Even the air seemed to hesitate as Rhys escorted Camilla, her heels striking marble in clipped defiance. The grandeur of Windsor Arch's oil paintings. Tapestries suddenly felt like witnesses, their centuries of history weighing down every step. Behind them, Inspector Harav and Archivist Trenton trailed in professional silence, sealing the moment into official record. Staff who crossed their path froze mid-bow, unsure whether to acknowledge their queen consort or recoil from the satchel of shame she had been forced to surrender. Whispers clung to the air. Fragile but ready to ignite into scandal at the faintest spark, Rhys kept his expression neutral. Though his mind replayed every moment in the vault's broken seals, the careless way the coronet had been left, the sovereign's star piece lying half-hidden as though it were trinket instead of treasure. He had seen battlefield betrayals in Afghanistan, but none had carried this strange mix of sorrow and inevitability. When they reached the threshold of the residential wing, Charles Stewart stopped them with a raised hand. Her Majesty will remain in her quarters until council is convened, he said quietly, eyes carefully avoiding hers. Camilla turned to Rhys then, her composure fracturing into something darker. You've humiliated me, she whispered. Do you understand the cost of crossing me? Guards are meant to be silent walls, not judges. Ree didn't flinch. Guards are meant to stand between danger and the crown, he replied evenly. Even when danger comes from within. Her eyes narrowed, glittering with fury. You believe history will remember you kindly? No, it will remember me, and you will be a footnote? Ree inclined his head slightly, his voice calm. If being a footnote means the crown's history remains unbroken, then I'll wear it with honor. The steward gestured, and 2 attendants opened the carved oak doors. Camilla stepped inside, shoulders stiff, chin high, though her eyes betrayed the sting of Charles' quiet judgment. The doors closed behind her with a resonant thud, final as a verdict. Ree exhaled slowly. The weight of centuries seemed to settle across his shoulders again. But this time it wasn't just the burden of silence. It was the burden of truth. Inspector Harav approached, her eyes sharp, but softened by something close to respect. You realize what happens now? Reports, inquiries, political theater. They'll test your loyalty, question your motives, even strip your post if it suits them. Ree met her gaze, a face worse crossfire. Trenton clutched his tablet to his chest, still pale. If he hadn't stopped her, those artifacts would be gone. And once gone, they'd vanish into whispers and rumors. We'd never get them back. Harav nodded. You've preserved more than relics tonight, Sergeant. You've preserved the line between power and privilege. Ree didn't answer. Turned toward the long corridor, its silence now heavier than any battlefield. Every portrait seemed to watch him, kings, queens, generals, figures who had ruled or defended, some who had betrayed. History had always judged them, not in the moment, but in the decades that followed, as he walked away. The echo of Camilla's last words trailed him like a shadow. You have no idea what you've done tonight. He knew exactly what he had done. And he knew history would decide the rest. At the archway, Camilla disappeared into the dim corridors of her private wing. No curtsy, no farewell. Just the brittle silence of a woman who had learned, perhaps too late, that some things mattered. More than crowns. The oak doors shut behind her with a soft, echoing thud. Not loud, not violent, just final. History often didn't scream when it turned. Sometimes it closed a door. Ree remained still, his ceremonial uniform catching the faint glow of torchlight. It wasn't an empty silence that surrounded him now, but one filled with weight, the silence of order restored, of heritage preserved. For the first time that night, he allowed himself a single breath of relief. He turned back through the long, echoing halls toward Vault Chamber 14. The portraits of monarchs watched from their gilded frames, stone saints looked down from alcoves, and it felt as though centuries themselves had approved his steps. When he reached the sealed chamber, specialists were already at work. Archivists in gloves moved like surgeons, carefully returning each artifact to its cradle. Inspectors logged entries on glowing tablets, photographing every seal, recording every shift in temperature. Each item was documented, secured, and restored. With reverence as if the very act of returning them was an oath renewed, the coronet gleamed beneath preservation lights, once again where it belonged. The sovereign's starpiece was catalogued, its broken seal noted, its history saved from vanishing into shadows. Piece by piece, Elizabeth's legacy was stitched back into the tapestry of the crown. Ree stood at the doorway, not intruding, but bearing witness. He didn't need thanks, nor recognition. The act itself was enough, because he knew the truth of his post. Soldiers fought battles in deserts and fields, but guardians fought them in silence, against forgetting, against greed, against the quiet. Theft of history tonight? He had one, and as the vault door closed once more, its tumblers grinding like the voice of time itself, he whispered the same words that had carried him through war and duty alike. Not on my watch.